When Clara thought she'd lost everything, she never imagined that saving a stranger buried alive in the woods would lead her to the love of her life and a danger that would threaten to destroy them both. But what the dying man whispered in that moment changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that would expose a web of betrayal, murder, and a love so powerful it could rise from the grave itself. Welcome to a story that will take you on an emotional roller coaster through the depths of human cruelty and the heights of unexpected love. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment below what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves through the dense Virginia woods as Clara Hartwell pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her shoulders. Her breath formed small clouds in the crisp October air as she trudged along the narrow dirt path, her 8-year-old son Tommy skipping ahead, his worn sneakers crunching through the carpet of fallen leaves. "Mom, look!" Tommy called out, pointing to a cluster of wild blackberries hanging from thorny vines. "Can we pick some, please?" Clara managed a tired smile. "Just a few, sweetheart. We need to get back before dark." She watched as her son carefully plucked the dark berries, his small fingers stained purple with juice. These walks in the woods behind their rented trailer had become their only escape from the suffocating weight of unpaid bills and eviction notices that seemed to multiply on their kitchen table like some cruel magic trick. 3 months. That's how long it had been since David left, taking with him not just his clothes and his promises, but also what little financial stability they'd managed to scrape together. Clara had been working double shifts at the diner ever since, her feet aching and her heart heavy, but it still wasn't enough. Never enough. "Tommy, stay close," she called as her son wandered further off the path, drawn by something glinting in the fading light. "There's something weird here, Mom." Tommy's voice carried a note of curiosity mixed with concern. I think someone's hurt." Clara's heart lurched as she hurried toward her son's voice, pushing through the low-hanging branches. What she found made her blood run cold. There, partially concealed beneath a mound of freshly turned earth and fallen leaves, was what looked like a shallow grave. But this wasn't the resting place of someone long dead. This was something far more horrifying. A weak, desperate voice emerged from beneath the dirt. "Help, please." "Oh my God," Clara whispered, dropping to her knees beside the disturbed earth. "Tommy, step back, baby." With trembling hands, she began to dig, her fingers scraping against cold soil and dead leaves. The voice grew stronger as she worked, more desperate. "Please. Can't breathe. They buried me." Clara's nails broke as she clawed at the earth, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Slowly, horrifyingly, a pale hand emerged from the dirt, fingers twitching, with what little life remained. "Tommy, run back to the trailer and call 911, she shouted over her shoulder. But her son stood frozen, his young mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Is he dead, Mom?" Tommy whispered. "Not yet," Clara muttered through gritted teeth, continuing to dig. "Not if I can help it." The face that emerged from that makeshift grave would haunt Clara's dreams for months to come, not because it was frightening, but because it was beautiful even in its current state of near death. High cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes that, when they finally opened, were the most startling shade of green she'd ever seen. Those eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. His lips, cracked and bleeding, moved with tremendous effort. "The ones I trusted," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They buried me alive." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't a hiking accident or a case of someone getting lost. This was attempted murder. Don't try to talk, she said softly, brushing dirt from his face with gentle fingers. You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here. But he gripped her wrist with surprising strength for someone who'd been buried alive. Listen to me, he gasped. My name is Adrian Blackwood. If they find out I'm alive, they'll kill us both. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Adrian Blackwood. She'd seen that name in the newspapers just last week. The tech billionaire who died in a car accident, whose funeral had been attended by hundreds of mourners and broadcast on national television. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. A bitter laugh escaped his cracked lips. That was the plan. But they got impatient. Couldn't wait for the car to finish the job. Clara's mind raced. If Adrian Blackwood was supposedly dead, if someone had tried to bury him alive, then whoever was responsible had unlimited resources and absolutely no qualms about murder. And now she and Tommy were witnesses. We have to get you to a hospital, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. No. His grip on her wrist tightened. No hospitals, no police, not yet. They have people everywhere. If word gets out that I survived, then what? Clara demanded. I can't just leave you here to die. Take me somewhere safe. Somewhere they'd never think to look. His green eyes bore into hers with desperate intensity. Please. I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I'll make it worth your while. I swear on my son's life I'll make this right. Son. The word hit Clara in a place she thought she'd built walls around. This man, this stranger who'd emerged from what should have been his grave, had a child somewhere who thought his father was dead. She looked back at Tommy, who was still standing frozen among the trees, his young face pale with shock. Then she looked down at Adrian, this broken man, who'd somehow survived what no one should survive and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Can you walk? She asked. I can try. Clara helped him sit up, soil cascading from his expensive suit, or what remained of it. His clothes were torn and filthy, his shirt stained with blood from cuts across his chest and arms. Someone had beaten him severely before burying him. Tommy, she called to her son, come help me. Mom, is he a bad man? Tommy asked, his voice small and uncertain. Clara looked into Adrian's eyes and saw pain there, yes, but also something else, a desperate honesty that she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror every morning since David left. No, baby, she said softly. He's just someone who needs our help. Together, mother and son helped Adrian to his feet. He swayed dangerously, and Clara wrapped his arm around her shoulders, surprised by how solid he felt, despite his weakened state. How far? He asked through gritted teeth. Not far, Clara lied. The walk back to their trailer would be nearly a mile through rough terrain, and she wasn't sure any of them would make it. But they had to try. Because something in Adrian's voice, in the way he'd spoken about his son, told Clara that this was about more than just survival. This was about justice, about family, about the kind of love that could literally move mountains, or in this case, rise from the grave. The journey back to Clara's trailer took nearly 2 hours. Adrian collapsed twice, and each time Clara was certain he wouldn't get back up. But he did, driven by something stronger than physical pain, the thought of his son Jonathan, who believed his father was dead and buried. Tell me about him, Clara said, as they rested against a fallen log, trying to keep Adrian conscious. Your son. A ghost of a smile crossed his battered features. Jonathan. He's 10. Loves baseball and astronomy. Wants to be an astronaut when he grows up. His voice broke slightly. I was supposed to take him to see the rocket launch at Kennedy Space Center this weekend. We've been planning it for months. You still can, Clara said firmly. When this is over, when you're better, you'll take him. If he forgives me for leaving him with her, Adrian whispered, and Clara heard a world of pain in those words. My wife, ex-wife now, I suppose, since I'm legally dead. The bitterness in his voice could have cut glass. Verena, she's the one who orchestrated all of this. Her and my best friend Clemens. Clara felt Tommy's small hand slip into hers as her son processed this adult conversation about betrayal and murder. She squeezed his fingers reassuringly, though her own heart was racing. They wanted your money, she said. It wasn't a question. My money, my company, my life, everything. Adrian's breathing was becoming more labored, and Clara knew they needed to move faster. The prenup protected most of my assets, but if I died... He trailed off, saving his breath for walking. When they finally reached Clara's trailer, it looked even more shabby than usual in the dim porch light. Paint peeling from the aluminum siding steps that sagged under their weight windows that rattled in their frames. Clara felt a flush of embarrassment as she helped Adrian up the steps. I know it's not much, she began, but Adrian cut her off. It's perfect, he said, and the gratitude in his voice was so genuine it brought tears to her eyes. No one would ever think to look for Adrian Blackwood here. Inside, Clara settled Adrian on the small sofa, its cushions worn thin from years of use. Tommy hovered nearby, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Tommy, can you get the first aid kit from the bathroom? Clara asked. And bring some clean towels. As her son scurried away, Clara knelt beside Adrian and began carefully examining his injuries. Bruises covered his torso in varying shades of purple and green, suggesting he'd been beaten over several days. There were rope burns around his wrists and ankles, and a particularly nasty gash across his left temple that was still seeping blood. They kept me in the basement of our summer house in the mountains, Adrian said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. 3 days of convincing me to sign papers transferring my shares to Verena before the divorce was final. But you didn't sign. I signed. His voice was flat, emotionless. After they showed me the video of Jonathan at school, told me how easy it would be for him to have an accident on the playground. Clara's hands stilled on the antiseptic bottle she'd been opening. They threatened your son. They know I'd give up everything for him. Everything except my life, because what good would all that money do him if he grows up thinking his father was a coward who abandoned him? Tommy returned with the first aid supplies, and Clara began the delicate process of cleaning Adrian's wounds. He endured it stoically, though she could see the pain in the tight lines around his eyes. Why didn't they just kill you outright? Tommy asked suddenly, his child's mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Clara started to scold him for such a blunt question, but Adrian answered seriously, as if speaking to an adult. Because they needed it to look like an accident. If Adrian Blackwood just disappeared, there would be investigations questions. But a car accident? He shrugged carefully. Tragic, but not suspicious. So they staged your death. Staged it badly, as it turns out. The car went over the embankment too early before the accelerant they'd planted could burn hot enough to destroy dental records. So they had to improvise. His jaw tightened. Clemens suggested they just finish the job the old-fashioned way. But you escaped. I was supposed to be unconscious when they buried me. The drugs they gave me, they didn't account for my tolerance. Years of prescription painkillers after a back injury had made me resistant. Adrian's voice grew darker. I heard everything they said as they shoveled dirt over my coffin. Every word about how they'd comfort my grieving son, how they'd help him move on from his father's memory. Clara finished bandaging the worst of his cuts and sat back on her heels. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take back everything they stole. My company, my son, my life." He met her eyes and she saw steel beneath the exhaustion. "But I can't do it alone. I need time to heal, to plan. Somewhere they'll never think to look. You want to stay here? If you'll have me. I know it's asking too much." "It's not," Clara said quickly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "You can stay as long as you need." Tommy looked between them, his young mind processing rapidly. "Are we going to be in danger?" he asked. Clara started to offer empty reassurances, but Adrian spoke first. "Yes," he said honestly. "If they find out I'm alive, if they discover you helped me, you'll be in serious danger. I won't lie to you about that." "Then why should we help you?" Tommy demanded, and Clara was proud of her son's directness, even as her heart ached for the adult concerns he was being forced to confront. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because sometimes doing the right thing is dangerous. Because somewhere out there is a little boy who thinks his father is dead, and he deserves to know the truth. And because—" He looked at Clara, and something passed between them, something electric and unexpected. "Because I think your mother knows what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She did know. She knew exactly what it felt like to have your world turned upside down by someone who was supposed to love you. "We'll help," she said firmly. "But we do this smart. No unnecessary risks." "Agreed." Adrian tried to sit up straighter and winced. "There's something else you should know. The car accident. It wasn't the first attempt on my life." Clara felt her blood chill. "What do you mean?" "6 months ago I started getting sick. Stomach pains, nausea, fatigue. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but I kept getting worse." Adrian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I had my hair tested privately. Arsenic poisoning in small doses over time." "She was poisoning you?" "Slowly, carefully, but I got suspicious and stopped eating meals at home. That's when they moved to more direct methods." He touched the bandage on his temple gingerly. The car accident was supposed to be the final solution. Tommy had been listening with the intensity only children could muster when faced with something far beyond their comprehension. "So your wife is really, really bad?" Despite everything, Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile Clara had seen from him. "Really, really bad," he agreed. "And we're going to help you stop her. We're going to try." Clara stood up, her legs shaky from kneeling so long. "You need food and rest. Real rest in a real bed." "The couch is fine." "No." Clara's voice brooked no argument. "You're injured and you've been through hell. You can take my room. Tommy and I will manage out here." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You said you'd make this worth our while. Well, the first payment is letting us take care of you properly." Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, surprise, gratitude, and something else that made Clara's heart skip a beat. When was the last time someone had cared about his well-being without wanting something in return? "Clara," he said softly, and the way he spoke her name sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you for everything." She helped him to his feet, acutely aware of how his hand felt in hers, warm, despite everything he'd been through, strong, despite his injuries. As they made their way to her small bedroom, Clara couldn't help but notice how out of place he looked in her humble trailer, like a prince in a peasant's cottage. But there was no condescension in his manner, no judgment of her circumstances. If anything, he seemed grateful for the simple kindness she was showing him. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said as she helped him settle onto her bed. The sheets were clean but faded, the mattress soft from years of use. Nothing like what he was probably accustomed to. "Clara." Adrian caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Why are you doing this, really?" She paused in the doorway, considering her answer. There were so many reasons: compassion for a fellow human being in need, outrage at the injustice of what had been done to him, concern for his son, who thought his father was dead. But beneath all those rational explanations was something else, something that had started the moment their eyes met in that makeshift grave. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she said finally. "Even millionaires who get buried alive in the woods." His smile was soft and genuine. "Billionaire, actually." "Oh." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Well, that's a lot of zeros." "It is. But right now, lying here in your bed, wearing your kindness like a blanket, I feel richer than I ever have." Clara's breath caught. She'd been married for 8 years in relationships before that. But no one had ever spoken to her the way Adrian just had, as if her simple acts of kindness were precious gifts rather than basic human decency. "Get some sleep," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out how to bring you back from the dead." As she closed the bedroom door behind her, Clara leaned against it for a moment, her heart racing. What had she gotten herself and Tommy into? Harboring a man who was supposed to be dead, helping him plot against people who had already tried to kill him once. "Mom?" Tommy's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay?" Clara looked at her son sitting on the couch in his pajamas and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. "I'm fine, baby. Are you?" "I think so." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "He's not what I expected a rich person to be like." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Mean maybe like he thought he was better than us." Tommy pulled his knees up to his chest. "But he talks to me like I'm a real person, not just a kid." Clara felt her heart clench. David had never talked to Tommy that way, even when they were married. He'd always treated her son like an inconvenience, an obstacle to be tolerated, rather than a person to be cherished. "Some people are good," she said, settling beside Tommy on the couch. "No matter how much money they have or where they come from. And some people—" She thought of Adrian Blackwood poisoning her husband while planning his murder. "Some people aren't." "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Tommy asked. Clara pulled her son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "I think we're doing what feels right in our hearts. Sometimes that's all we can do." They made beds on the couch using spare blankets and pillows, but Clara found herself staring at the ceiling long after Tommy had fallen asleep beside her. Every creak of the old trailer made her jump. Every distant sound made her wonder if somehow Adrian's would-be killers had tracked them down. But beneath the fear was something else, an excitement she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since David left, since the bills started piling up, and the eviction notices began arriving, Clara felt like she was part of something important. Something that mattered beyond just surviving from day to day. In the morning, she would start helping Adrian plan his resurrection. They would figure out how to expose the people who had betrayed him, how to reclaim his life and reunite him with his son. It would be dangerous, probably impossible, and almost certainly insane. But as Clara finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself smiling. Because sometimes the most impossible things were the ones most worth fighting for. And somewhere in the darkness of her small bedroom, Adrian Blackwood lay awake with similar thoughts, touching the clean bandages Clara had applied with such gentle care, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, being buried alive had been the best thing that ever happened to him. because it had led him to her. The morning light filtering through Clara's thin curtains revealed just how much Adrian's appearance had improved after a night of real rest. The deathly pallor had faded from his skin, and though the bruises remained vivid, reminders of his ordeal, his green eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there the night before. Clara found him sitting on the edge of her bed, carefully testing his range of motion as he rotated his shoulders. He'd removed his torn shirt, and she couldn't help but notice the lean muscle beneath the tapestry of bruises. This wasn't the soft body of a man who'd spent his life behind a desk. "You should still be resting," she said from the doorway, trying to keep her voice clinical despite the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. "I've rested enough." Adrian looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Thank you, Clara. For the bed, for everything. I haven't slept that well in, God, I can't remember how long." There was an intimacy to the moment, him half-dressed in her bedroom morning light, casting shadows across his face that made Clara acutely aware of how long it had been since she'd felt desired by anyone. She pushed the thought away quickly. "Are you hungry?" she asked, retreating toward the kitchen. "I don't have much, but whatever you have is perfect." Adrian followed her, moving slowly but steadily. "I'm not exactly in a position to be picky." Tommy was already at the small kitchen table demolishing a bowl of cereal while studying Adrian with unconcealed fascination. "Do you really own a whole company?" he asked between spoonfuls. "I did," Adrian said, settling carefully into the chair across from Tommy. "Blackwood Technologies. We develop software for medical devices, security systems, things like that." "Did you invent stuff?" A genuine smile crossed Adrian's face. "Some things. Mostly I found brilliant people and gave them the resources to invent amazing things." Clara set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Adrian, noting how his hands trembled slightly as he picked up the fork. The after effects of whatever drugs they'd used on him, she guessed. "Tell me about Verena," she said, settling into the third chair with her own modest breakfast. "How long were you married?" Adrian's expression darkened. 5 years. We met at a charity gala. She was there representing her father's foundation. Beautiful, charming, everything I thought I wanted in a wife. He took a careful bite of eggs. "I was such an idiot." "You loved her." "I thought I did. But looking back," Adrian shook his head, "I think I loved the idea of her, the perfect family she represented. Verena knew exactly what to say, how to be what I needed her to be." "When did you realize something was wrong?" "Gradually, then all at once." Adrian's voice grew distant. "Little things at first. She'd ask detailed questions about my business dealings, always claiming she was just interested in my work. She started suggesting changes to my will, my insurance policies. Said it was for Jonathan's protection. But it wasn't. No, she was systematically positioning herself to inherit everything if something happened to me. And when that wasn't moving fast enough." He touched the healing cut on his temple. "She decided to speed up the timeline." Tommy had been listening with the intensity children brought to adult conversations they weren't supposed to understand. "What about your son? Where is he now?" Pain flickered across Adrian's features. "With Verena. She has full custody now that I'm legally dead. Jonathan thinks his father died in a car accident and was cremated." His voice broke slightly. "He thinks there's nothing left of me to even visit." Clara reached across the table without thinking, covering Adrian's hand with hers. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that matched what she was feeling. "We'll get him back," she said firmly. "But first we need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with." Who else is involved besides Verena and Clemens? Adrian's fingers turned under hers palm to palm, and neither of them pulled away. Clemens Reeves, my best friend since college, best man at my wedding, Jonathan's godfather. I trusted him with everything. The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. He's been sleeping with Verena for at least 2 years, probably longer. How do you know? Security cameras in my home office picked up more than business meetings. I found the footage after I started getting suspicious about the poisoning. Adrian's jaw tightened. They weren't exactly discreet once they thought I was dying. Clara felt sick. They were planning your murder while having an affair in your own house. Clemens knew every detail of my security protocols, my business accounts, even my medical information. He's the one who suggested the arsenic said it would look like a rare autoimmune condition. Adrian's hand tightened in hers. He's also the one who convinced Verena that Jonathan would be better off without a father who was clearly losing his mind. Losing your mind. Part of their plan. As the arsenic built up in my system, I became paranoid, forgetful, prone to outbursts. They used that to paint me as an unfit father and unstable business leader. By the time I figured out what was happening, half my own board of directors thought I was having a nervous breakdown. Tommy pushed his empty cereal bowl away. So, they made everyone think you were crazy, then they tried to kill you. That's about the size of it, yes. Clara studied Adrian's face, seeing past the physical injuries to the deeper wounds beneath. How long do we have before they realize the burial didn't work? Not long. They'll want to make sure the job was finished, especially after the car accident didn't go according to plan. Adrian released her hand reluctantly and stood moving to the small window that overlooked the woods. Clemens is thorough. He'll check the grave within a day or two. And when he finds it empty, they'll know I'm alive and they'll tear this area apart looking for me. Adrian turned back to face them, his expression grim. Which is why I need to move quickly. I can't stay here much longer without putting you both in danger. Where will you go? Clara asked, though something inside her rebelled at the thought of him leaving. I have a few safe houses they don't know about. But first I need to gather evidence. Solid, undeniable proof of what they've done. Adrian began pacing the small kitchen, his mind clearly racing. The security footage from my house, financial records showing the fraudulent transfers, medical records proving the arsenic poisoning. How do you get any of that without being caught? Very carefully. Adrian stopped pacing and looked directly at Clara. And probably not without help. What kind of help? The kind that involves considerable risk to anyone providing it. Adrian's voice was careful, measured. I won't ask you to do anything dangerous, Clara. You've already done more than enough. Well, but Clara was already shaking her head. You're not going anywhere alone. Not yet. She surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. You're still injured, still weak from whatever they drugged you with. You wouldn't last a day trying to break into secure locations and steal evidence. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Clara stood moving closer to him. Besides, they're looking for Adrian Blackwood, not a single mother and her son running errands around town. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made Clara's heart race. You'd do that for me. For you, for your son, for justice. Clara met his gaze steadily. And maybe because I'm tired of feeling helpless all the time. Adrian studied her face for a long moment, and Clara had the strange sensation that he was seeing her, really seeing her, in a way no one had in years. All right, he said finally. But we do this smart. We plan every move, every contingency, and if things go bad, you and Tommy disappear. Promise me. I promise. I mean it, Clara. These people have already proven they'll kill to protect their secrets. I won't have your deaths on my conscience." The gravity in his voice sent a chill down Clara's spine but also strengthened her resolve. "Then we better make sure we don't get caught." The next several hours were spent in careful planning. Adrian sketched out the layout of his house, marking security camera locations and entry points. He explained the routine of his household staff, most of whom had been with him for years and weren't involved in Verina's scheme. "Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, she leaves every day at 3, Adrian said, drawing lines on his makeshift map. "She's loyal, but Verina has convinced her that I was having paranoid episodes before my death. If Mrs. Henderson sees you, she'll call the police thinking you're burglars." "What about your home office?" Clara asked, studying the layout. "Where would Verina keep the important documents?" "She wouldn't. Too risky. But Clemens has an office at the company headquarters, and that's where he'd store anything incriminating." Adrian tapped the paper with his pen. "The problem is getting access. Blackwood Technologies has state-of-the-art security, and Clemens has probably changed all the access codes since my death." Tommy, who had been coloring at the other end of the table while listening to their conversation, suddenly looked up. "What about the cleaning people?" Both adults turned to stare at him. "What cleaning people?" Clara asked. "At Dad's work, the cleaning people come at night. They go everywhere, and nobody pays attention to them because they're just cleaning." Tommy went back to his coloring, as if he'd just solved a complex mathematical equation, rather than potentially cracked their entire problem. Adrian stared at the boy with something approaching awe. "That's actually brilliant. Commercial cleaning crews work after hours. They have access to everything, and no one questions their presence." "But we're not part of any cleaning crew," Clara pointed out. "No, but I know who the building uses, Pinnacle Cleaning Services. I've seen their people working late when I've had to go back to the office for something." Adrian's mind was clearly racing. "If we could get uniforms, find out their schedule. That's a lot of ifs. I have a contact who might be able to help. Marcus Webb, he's head of security at Blackwood Technologies. We served together in the Army, and he's one of the few people I trust completely." Adrian paused. "The problem is contacting him without alerting anyone to the fact that I'm alive." Clara considered this. "What if I contacted him as someone who worked for you, maybe someone with information about your death?" "That could work. Marcus is suspicious by nature. If someone approached him claiming to have information about irregularities surrounding my accident, he'd want to investigate quietly." Adrian looked at Clara with growing admiration. "You'd have to be convincing, though. Marcus doesn't trust easily." "What would I need to know to be convincing?" For the next hour, Adrian coached Clara on details about his business, his routines, his relationships with key employees. She was a quick study, absorbing information with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing lives depended on her performance. "Marcus has a scar on his left hand from an IED explosion in Afghanistan," Adrian said. "He's never married lives alone with a German shepherd named Ranger. He drinks his coffee black and has a habit of clicking his pen when he's thinking. And he'd believe that you confided in a... What am I supposed to be exactly? A consultant. Someone I hired privately to look into security issues." Adrian met her eyes. "Someone I trusted with sensitive information because I was beginning to suspect people close to me." As afternoon faded into evening, they refined their plan. Clara would approach Marcus Webb the next day, claiming to be Sarah Mitchell, a security consultant Adrian had hired before his death. She would suggest that Adrian had suspected he was in danger and had asked her to gather evidence if anything happened to him. "What if he asks for proof that you hired me?" Clara asked. "He won't, not initially. Marcus is too smart to dismiss potential intelligence without investigating first. But, Adrian hesitated. If he does ask, tell him I said Kabul taught us that trust is a luxury we can't afford. He'll know that came from me. The weight of what they were planning settled over Clara as darkness fell. Tomorrow she would essentially be going undercover to expose a murder conspiracy, something that existed only in movies and television shows in her world. Are you having second thoughts? Adrian asked gently, as if reading her mind. Clara looked at him sitting across from her in the lamplight, this man who had been buried alive and betrayed by everyone he'd trusted, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. No, she said firmly. No second thoughts. Clara, Adrian's voice was soft, careful. Why are you really doing this? I mean the real reason, not the noble ones you gave me earlier. Clara was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that could explain the complex mix of emotions driving her actions. Do you remember what you said yesterday about taking back everything they stole from you? Yes. Well, I know what it feels like to have someone steal your life while you watch helplessly. David didn't try to poison me or bury me alive, but he took my security, my trust, my belief that I deserved better than scraps. Clara's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Maybe helping you take back your life is a way of taking back mine. Adrian was very still, his green eyes locked on her face. And maybe you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen something worth saving. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Clara felt drawn to him in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. We should get some sleep, she said finally, though the last thing she wanted to do was end this moment. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Clara. Adrian stood as she did, and suddenly they were very close in the small space of her kitchen. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes of all this, I want you to know that finding you, having you choose to help me, it's the first good thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember. Clara looked up at him. This man who had emerged from what should have been his grave and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been closed off and protected for so long, she'd almost forgotten it existed. Adrian, she whispered, and then his hand was cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. For a moment she desperately wanted him to. But then Tommy's voice came from the living room asking for help with his homework, and the spell was broken. Tomorrow, Adrian said quietly, his hand dropping away from her face. We'll figure out tomorrow, and then, Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for his answer. And then maybe we'll both have a chance at the life we deserve. As Clara helped Tommy with his math problems, she was acutely aware of Adrian moving quietly around her small home, testing locks, checking sight lines from the windows. He moved like someone accustomed to danger, someone who understood that survival often depended on preparation and vigilance. Is he going to stay with us forever? Tommy asked quietly, glancing toward the kitchen, where Adrian was studying building layouts by lamplight. I don't know, sweetie. Probably not forever. I hope he stays a while, Tommy said, surprising her. I like him. He doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid. Clara's heart clenched. You're not stupid, Tommy. Never think that. I know, but most grown-ups act like kids can't understand anything important. Tommy erased a wrong answer and tried again. He talks to me like Dad should have. The simple observation hit Clara harder than she'd expected. David had never shown interest in Tommy's thoughts or opinions, had never treated him as anything more than an inconvenience to be managed. But Adrian, a virtual stranger dealing with his own life-threatening crisis, had taken time to answer Tommy's questions seriously, to include him in conversations rather than dismissing him. Maybe that's because he has a son of his own, Clara said carefully. Maybe. Or maybe he's just a better person than Dad was. From the mouths of babes, Clara thought watching her son work through his math problems with renewed focus. Sometimes children saw things with a clarity that adults spent years trying to rationalize away. Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, Clara found Adrian sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by papers, covered in diagrams, notes, and what looked like architectural sketches. "Planning our heist?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Something like that." Adrian looked up from his work, and Clara noticed the exhaustion that lingered around his eyes despite his improved appearance. "I've been thinking about what happens after we get the evidence. Even if we can prove everything Verena and Clemens have done, taking them down won't be simple." "What do you mean?" "They've had months to consolidate power to place their allies in key positions. Clemens is now acting CEO of my company, and Verena has legal guardianship of Jonathan. Even with proof of their crimes unwinding, all of that will take time." Adrian rubbed his temples wearily. "Time during which they could disappear, take Jonathan with them." Clara felt a chill of fear. "You think they'd run?" "If they felt cornered, absolutely. Verena has dual citizenship. She could take Jonathan to Switzerland and claim I'm a dead man trying to kidnap her son." Adrian's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "The legal battles alone could take years, and by then Jonathan would be grown up thinking his father abandoned him," Clara finished. "Exactly." Clara studied Adrian's profile in the lamplight, seeing the weight of fatherhood and responsibility that drove him even more than the desire for justice or revenge. "So we don't give them time to run," she said finally. "We hit them fast, hard, and from multiple directions at once." Adrian turned to look at her, something like hope flickering in his expression. "That would require perfect timing and considerable risk." "Then we better make sure our timing is perfect." A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, transforming his features in a way that made Clara's breath catch. "Have I mentioned that you're remarkable?" "Once or twice," Clara said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "But I wouldn't mind hearing it again." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise, until Adrian's expression grew serious again. "Clara, there's something else you need to know. About the danger we're walking into." "Tell me." "Clemens is former military like Marcus. But where Marcus served honorably, Clemens was discharged under questionable circumstances. There were allegations of war crimes, civilian casualties that couldn't be properly investigated." Adrian's voice dropped. "The man who helped plan my murder isn't just ruthless. He's trained to kill." Clara felt her mouth go dry, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you trying to scare me out of helping you?" "I'm trying to make sure you understand what we're dealing with. If Clemens realizes I'm alive, if he feels threatened—" Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to know you can handle yourself if things go wrong. I worked 3 jobs to support Tommy and myself before David left. I've dealt with drunk customers, aggressive landlords, and bill collectors who thought intimidation was a valid business strategy." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I'm stronger than I look. I don't doubt that. But this is different." "I know." Clara turned her hand in his palm to palm, fingers interlacing. "But so am I. The woman who was married to David, who let him walk all over her for years, she wouldn't have helped a stranger crawl out of his own grave. She wouldn't be planning to break into a corporate office to steal evidence of murder." "What changed?" Clara considered the question seriously. "Maybe I did. Or maybe I just finally found something worth fighting for." Their eyes met across the small table, and Clara saw her own feelings reflected in Adrian's gaze, the impossible connection that had sparked between them, the sense that they were meant to find each other, despite the horrific circumstances that had brought them together. "Clara," Adrian said quietly, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles. "After this is over, when I have my life back, when Jonathan is safe. Yes. I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice, somewhere you deserve." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Just dinner." Adrian's smile was soft and full of promise. "We'll start with dinner and see where it leads." "I'd like that," Clara whispered, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. As they sat in the quiet of her small kitchen, hands clasped across papers, covered with plans for exposing murder and reclaiming stolen lives, Clara thought about how dramatically her world had changed in less than 48 hours. 2 days ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could scrape together enough money for groceries. Now she was planning what amounted to a one-woman intelligence operation against people who had already proven they would kill to protect their secrets. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more alive than she had in years. "We should probably get some sleep," Adrian said reluctantly, but neither of them moved to break the contact between their hands. "Probably," Clara agreed, making no effort to stand. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Very complicated. And dangerous. Extremely dangerous." Adrian's thumb continued its gentle movement across her skin. "Any regrets?" Clara thought about her quiet life, her simple routines, the safety of staying invisible and unremarkable. Then she thought about Jonathan Blackwood, a 10-year-old boy who believed his father was dead, and about the man sitting across from her, who had survived being buried alive through sheer force of will and love for his son. "None," she said firmly. "No regrets at all." When they finally separated to prepare for another night of uncomfortable sleeping arrangements, Clara caught herself hoping that tomorrow's mission would succeed, not just because justice demanded it, but because she wanted to see what came next for them. She wanted to discover what it felt like to be cherished by someone who saw her strength rather than her struggles, her possibilities rather than her limitations. As she settled onto the couch beside Tommy's sleeping form, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Adrian and their sons became a real family, not born of convenience or desperation, but of choice and love and the kind of deep connection that could survive being buried alive. It was a dangerous dream, she knew. Tomorrow could go wrong in 1,000 different ways, and even if it went right, there would be months of legal battles and media attention and complications she couldn't even imagine. But for the first time in years, Clara fell asleep with hope in her heart and the promise of tomorrow's possibilities lighting her dreams like stars. The morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Clara's nervous energy as she stood before her small bathroom mirror trying to transform herself into Sarah Mitchell, security consultant. Adrian had given her one of his business cards to study, and she'd practiced her cover story until the words felt natural in her mouth. "You look different," Tommy observed from the doorway, watching as Clara applied makeup with more care than usual. "That's the idea," she replied, smoothing down the blazer she'd borrowed from her one professional outfit, a remnant from her brief stint as a bank teller years ago. "I need to look like someone important enough to have worked for Adrian." "You already look important to me," Tommy said simply, and Clara felt her heart clench with love for her perceptive son. "Thank you, baby. That means everything." Adrian appeared behind Tommy fully dressed, despite his injuries. He'd found a way to make his torn and bloodied clothes look almost presentable, though Clara noticed he moved carefully to avoid aggravating his healing wounds. "You look perfect," he said, his green eyes taking in her transformation with obvious approval. Professional, trustworthy, exactly what Marcus would expect from someone I'd hire for sensitive work. And if he doesn't believe me, he will. Adrian's confidence was reassuring, even as Clara's stomach churned with anxiety. Marcus has good instincts about people. He'll see what I see in you, which is strength, intelligence, the kind of integrity that can't be faked. Adrian moved closer, his hand coming up to adjust the collar of her blazer, in a gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. You're going to do brilliantly. The plan was straightforward in theory, terrifying in execution. Clara would drive to Blackwood Technologies and request a meeting with Marcus Webb, claiming to have urgent information about Adrian's death. While she distracted him and hopefully gained his cooperation, Adrian would remain hidden at the trailer, monitoring police scanners and local news for any sign that his burial site had been discovered. If something goes wrong, Adrian said, as Clara gathered her purse and keys, if you feel unsafe at any point, you walk away. Promise me. I promise. Clara looked at him standing in her small living room, this man who had changed her entire world in the space of 3 days. What if Marcus doesn't believe me? What if he calls security? Then you stick to your story and leave calmly. You're Sarah Mitchell, a security consultant, who was hired to investigate potential threats against Adrian Blackwood. You have concerns about his death and wanted to share them with someone you knew he trusted. Adrian's voice was steady, reassuring. Even if Marcus is suspicious, he won't do anything rash until he's had time to verify your story. Tommy hugged Clara goodbye, whispering, "Be careful, Mom," in her ear, with a solemnity that reminded her how much danger they were all in. Then Adrian walked her to her car, his hand on the small of her back, a touch that sent warmth spreading through her, despite her fear. "Clara," he said, as she opened the driver's door, "whatever happens today, I want you to know that meeting you, having you choose to help me, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." His hand cupped her face gently, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Hope that there are still good people in the world. Hope that maybe I deserve a second chance at happiness." For a moment, Clara thought he might kiss her. For a moment, she desperately wanted him to. But then she remembered where she was going, what she was about to do, and pulled back reluctantly. "Save that thought," she said softly, "until I get back." "I will." The drive to Blackwood Technologies took 45 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, each mile taking Clara further from her familiar world of trailer parks and discount stores into a realm of manicured lawns and luxury cars. The corporate headquarters rose from its landscaped grounds, like a monument to success, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Clara sat in her car in the visitor parking lot for several minutes, studying the building and trying to calm her racing heart. Security cameras tracked her from multiple angles, and she could see guards stationed at the main entrance. This wasn't going to be as simple as walking in and asking to speak with someone. Taking a deep breath, Clara straightened her shoulders and walked toward the main entrance with as much confidence as she could muster. The lobby was impressive: marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a reception desk that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. "Good morning," she said to the receptionist, a polished young woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "I need to speak with Marcus Webb regarding urgent security matters related to Adrian Blackwood's death." The receptionist's expression shifted from professional courtesy to sharp attention. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Mitchell?" "Sarah Mitchell. And no, I don't have an appointment, but Mr. Webb will want to hear what I have to say." Clara leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "I was working for Mr. Blackwood before his death, investigating potential security threats. I have information that suggests his accident may not have been accidental. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. One moment, please. She picked up her phone and spoke in hushed tones, glancing frequently at Clara. After several minutes, she hung up and nodded. Mr. Webb will see you. Third floor suite 301. The elevator is just past the security checkpoint. Clara's relief was palpable as she passed through the metal detectors and took the elevator to the third floor. So far, Adrian's assessment of Marcus Webb's character seemed accurate. He was at least willing to listen to potential intelligence about his former boss's death. Suite 301 was clearly a security office with multiple monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the building. Marcus Webb was exactly as Adrian had described him, mid-40s military bearing, and a watchful intensity that suggested he missed very little. The scar on his left hand was visible as he gestured for Clara to take a seat. Ms. Mitchell, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You have information about Adrian Blackwood's death. I do. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. Mr. Blackwood hired me 3 weeks before his death to conduct a discreet security assessment. He was concerned about potential threats from people close to him. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Clara noticed his hand move to a pen on his desk, clicking it rhythmically. What kind of threats? He suspected someone was accessing his personal files, possibly monitoring his communications. He also mentioned concerns about his wife's behavior and that of his business partner, Clemens Reeves. Clara paused, watching Marcus's reaction. I was supposed to deliver my preliminary findings the week he died. And what were those findings? Clara took a breath, knowing this was the crucial moment. Evidence of unauthorized access to his personal accounts, suspicious financial transfers, and what appeared to be surveillance of his daily routines by someone with intimate knowledge of his schedule. Marcus was very still, his pen clicking steadily. Do you have proof of these findings? Some. But I believe there's more evidence to be found, particularly in Mr. Reeves's office. Clara leaned forward slightly. Mr. Blackwood was very specific about wanting me to investigate that office if anything happened to him. Why come to me with this information? Because Mr. Blackwood said you were the only person at this company he trusted completely. He said if something happened to him, I should bring my findings to you because you'd know what to do with them. Clara paused, then played her trump card. He said to tell you that Kabul taught him trust is a luxury he couldn't afford. Marcus went completely still, his pen falling silent. Clara held her breath, waiting for his reaction. That's something Adrian would say, Marcus said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Jesus Christ. You're telling me someone murdered him? I'm telling you that his death was very convenient for some people, and the evidence I was gathering suggests it may not have been the accident everyone believes. Clara kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. I need access to Clemens Reeves's office to complete my investigation. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the company parking lot. Clemens has been acting CEO since Adrian's death. He's consolidated a lot of power very quickly, made personnel changes, altered security protocols. What kind of changes? New access codes, different cleaning schedules, revised financial authorization procedures. Marcus turned back to face her. Changes that someone planning to steal company assets might make to cover their tracks. Clara felt a surge of excitement. Marcus was believing her story, seeing the connections she was suggesting. Can you get me access to his office? Not during business hours. Too many people around, too many questions. Marcus returned to his desk, his military training evident in his quick decision-making process. But the cleaning crew works tonight. Pinnacle Cleaning Services, they're here from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Could you get me added to their roster temporarily? Marcus studied her face intently. This is serious business, Ms. Mitchell. If you're right about Adrian being murdered, then you're talking about exposing people who've already killed once. They won't hesitate to kill again. I understand the risks. Clara met his gaze steadily. But I owe it to Mr. Blackwood to finish the job he hired me to do. All right. Marcus made his decision with the same swift certainty Adrian had described. I can get you a pinnacle uniform and ID badge, but you go in, get what you need, and get out. No unnecessary risks. Agreed. And Ms. Mitchell, if you find evidence of what you're suggesting, you bring it directly to me. No one else in this building can be trusted until we know the full scope of what we're dealing with. Clara nodded, her pulse racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. How do I contact you when I have what we need? Marcus handed her a business card with a number written on the back. That's my personal cell. Call me the moment you're clear of the building. As Clara left the Blackwood Technologies building, she felt a rush of triumph mixed with terror. Phase 1 of their plan had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. Marcus Webb not only believed her story, but was actively helping her gain access to Clemens's office. But the hardest part was still ahead. The drive back to the trailer seemed to take forever, her mind racing, with everything that had happened and everything that still needed to go right. When she finally pulled into her driveway, Adrian was waiting on the porch, his face tight with worry. How did it go? He asked, before she was even out of the car. Better than we hoped. Clara felt herself grinning as the adrenaline of successful deception flooded her system. Marcus believed every word. He's going to get me into the building tonight. Adrian's expression shifted from worry to amazement to something that looked like pride. You did it. You actually convinced him. We did it, Clara corrected, allowing herself to be pulled into his arms, despite the fact that they were standing in full view of her neighbors. Your assessment of his character was perfect. The moment I mentioned Kabul, I could see him make the decision to trust me. Adrian held her tightly, and Clara could feel some of the tension leave his body. I was terrified something would go wrong, that you'd be arrested or worse. I was terrified too, Clara admitted, breathing in his scent and allowing herself to feel safe in his arms. But it worked. Tonight we get the evidence we need. Tommy appeared in the doorway, having heard their voices. Did you catch the bad guys, Mom? Not yet, sweetie. But we're getting close. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Marcus had arranged for a Pinnacle Cleaning Services uniform to be delivered to a predetermined drop site, along with an ID badge and building access card. Clara practiced moving naturally in the unfamiliar uniform, learning to look like she belonged in the sterile corporate environment. Remember? Adrian coached her as evening approached. Clemens's office is on the executive floor corner suite with windows facing east. His computer will be password protected, but look for physical files, anything that might reference the arsenic or the staged accident. What if his office is locked? Marcus said he'd make sure it wasn't. But if something goes wrong, if you encounter anyone who questions your presence, you're just there to empty trash bins and vacuum carpets. Nothing more. Clara nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. And you'll be monitoring the police scanner, every frequency. If there's any sign that they've discovered the burial site, any indication that they know I'm alive, I'll call you immediately. Adrian's expression was grave. If that happens, you abort the mission and get out of there as fast as possible. As darkness fell, Clara changed into the cleaning service uniform, the polyester fabric rough against her skin. The ID badge felt heavy clipped to her shirt, and she found herself touching it nervously, as if it might disappear. You look like you belong there, Adrian said, studying her transformation. Professional invisible. Exactly what you need to be. I don't feel invisible. I feel like I'm wearing a neon sign that says fraud. That's normal. The key is to act like you have every right to be there because tonight you do. Adrian moved closer, his hands coming up to rest on her shoulders. Clara, I need you to know something before you go. What? If this goes wrong, if something happens to you because of me, his voice was rough with emotion. I'll never forgive myself. Nothing's going to happen to me. Clara reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. I'm going to get the evidence, expose what they did to you, and then we're going to figure out what comes next for us. Us, Adrian repeated as if testing the word. I like the sound of that. So do I. This time when Adrian leaned down to kiss her, Clara didn't pull away. His lips were soft against hers, gentle but insistent, and she felt something inside her chest bloom like a flower opening to sunlight. The kiss was everything she'd dreamed it might be: tender, passionate, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. That's for luck, Adrian said softly. I'll take all the luck I can get. The Blackwood Technologies building looked different at night, its glass facade lit from within like a beacon against the dark sky. Clara sat in her car in the Pinnacle Cleaning Services section of the parking lot, watching other uniformed workers make their way toward the employee entrance. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone around her could hear it. At exactly 9 p.m., she joined the stream of cleaning personnel entering the building. Her ID badge worked perfectly, and none of the security guards gave her a second glance. To them, she was just another invisible worker there to maintain the pristine corporate environment. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless, and Clara forced herself to breathe steadily as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, she found herself in a hallway lined with impressive offices, each bearing a nameplate that spoke of corporate power and influence. Clemens Reeves's office was exactly where Adrian had said it would be, and to Clara's relief, the door was unlocked. She slipped inside, quickly closing the door behind her and taking a moment to orient herself in the dimly lit space. The office was larger than her entire trailer, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city lights. A massive desk dominated one corner, while a seating area with leather furniture occupied another. Built-in bookcases lined one wall, filled with what appeared to be legal and business texts. Clara began her search methodically, starting with the desk drawers. Most contained routine office supplies and correspondence, but the bottom drawer was locked. She examined it carefully, wishing she had Adrian's expertise with security systems. Moving to the filing cabinets, she found them mostly unlocked and began going through folders systematically. Financial reports, personnel files, meeting minutes. Nothing immediately incriminating, but she photographed key documents with her phone camera as Adrian had instructed. It was in the third filing cabinet that she found the folder marked Project Transition, innocuous enough to avoid suspicion, but containing documents that made her blood run cold. There were medical reports detailing the effects of arsenic poisoning, maps of the mountain road where Adrian's car had gone over the embankment, and most damning of all, a timeline showing exactly when each phase of the plan would be implemented. Clara's hands shook as she photographed each page, the evidence of premeditated murder laid out in clinical detail. There were email printouts between Clemens and someone identified only as V, undoubtedly Verena, discussing dosage amounts and timing schedules. One email in particular made Clara's stomach turn. A becoming suspicious about symptoms. May need to accelerate timeline. Car accident scenario ready to implement if necessary. Burial location prepared as backup contingency. They had planned everything. Every detail of Adrian's murder had been carefully orchestrated, down to the backup plan of burying him alive if the car accident didn't finish the job. Clara was so focused on photographing the documents that she almost missed the sound of the office door opening. Almost. She spun around to find Clemens Reeves himself standing in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation as he took in the scene Clara standing beside. His open filing cabinet, camera phone in hand, surrounded by scattered documents. "Well, well," Clemens said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. "What do we have here?" Clara's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm with the cleaning service. You were just photographing confidential documents in my private office at 10 o'clock at night." Clemens's voice was calm, but Clara could see the danger in his eyes. "That's a very interesting cleaning technique. I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first let me ask you something." Clemens moved closer, and Clara noticed the predatory way he carried himself, like someone accustomed to violence. "How much did Adrian pay you to spy on me?" Clara's blood turned to ice. He knew. Somehow impossibly he knew who she was and why she was there. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to edge toward the door. "Of course you don't." Clemens smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Just like you don't know that we found the empty grave this morning. Just like you don't know that Adrian Blackwood is supposed to be dead and buried." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. They knew Adrian was alive. They knew she was connected to him. And she was trapped in an office 30 stories above the ground, with a man who had already proven he would kill to protect his secrets. "I think we need to have a conversation." Clemens continued, moving to his desk and picking up his phone. "About where your friend is hiding and about how much you know about things that are none of your business." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara repeated, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. "Let me explain something to you," Clemens said, setting down the phone and walking back toward her. "Adrian Blackwood is a dead man. Legally, officially, and soon to be literally. The only question is whether you and your son join him, or whether you disappear quietly and never mention any of this again." The threat to Tommy sent a surge of maternal fury through Clara that temporarily overwhelmed her fear. "Don't you dare threaten my son." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply explaining the reality of your situation." Clemens was close enough now that Clara could smell his cologne, could see the cold intelligence in his eyes. "You have something that belongs to me, and I have something you value. I think we can reach an arrangement." "What do you want?" "Adrian's location, the return of any evidence you may have gathered, and your word that you'll disappear back to whatever hole you crawled out of and never speak of any of this again." Clara's mind raced, trying to think of a way out of the situation. The documents she'd photographed were still on her phone, but they wouldn't do any good if she and Tommy ended up dead. And Adrian, if they found him, if they finished what they'd started in that shallow grave. "I need time to think," she said. "Time is a luxury you don't have." Clemens reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, not pointing it at her, but making sure she saw it. "You see, my dear, I have a meeting with Verena in an hour to discuss how to handle our little resurrection problem. I'd prefer to tell her it's been resolved." Clara stared at the weapon, her mouth dry with terror. "And if I refuse, then your son becomes an orphan tonight, and Adrian gets to experience being buried alive all over again. Permanently, this time." The casual way he spoke about murder, the complete lack of emotion in his voice, drove home just how dangerous this man truly was. But even as fear threatened to paralyze her, Clara found herself thinking about Adrian waiting for her call, about Tommy sleeping safely in their trailer, about the 10-year-old boy who thought his father was dead. "All right," she said finally. "I'll tell you what you want to know." "Wise choice." Clemens smiled and pulled out his phone. But first, let's make sure you're not armed with any unpleasant surprises. As he began scrolling through his contacts, presumably to call for backup, Clara made a desperate calculation. The office door was 15 feet away. The gun was in Clemens's right hand, his phone in his left. If she moved fast enough, if she could catch him off guard. Actually, she said, taking a small step backward, there's something else you should know. What's that? Clemens looked up from his phone, irritated by the interruption. Adrian isn't the only one who survived what you thought you'd buried. Before Clemens could react to her words, Clara lunged toward the light switch, plunging the office into darkness. She heard him curse and saw the muzzle flash as he fired blindly in her direction, the bullet shattering the window behind where she'd been standing. Clara threw herself toward the door, her hands fumbling for the handle as Clemens shouted behind her. She burst into the hallway and ran for the emergency stairwell, her feet pounding against the polished floors as she heard him pursuing her. 30 floors. She had to descend 30 floors while being chased by an armed man who had already tried to kill her once tonight. But as her feet hit the concrete stairs and she began her desperate flight downward, Clara found herself thinking not of her own survival, but of Adrian and Tommy, and the life they might build together if she could just make it out of this building alive. Behind her, Clemens's footsteps echoed in the stairwell, and she knew the real chase was just beginning. Clara's lungs burned as she flew down the emergency stairwell, taking the concrete steps 3 at a time, while Clemens's heavy footfalls echoed behind her. 28 floors, 27. Each landing brought her closer to freedom, but also closer to the building's security systems and potential backup that Clemens might have called. You can't run forever. His voice boomed through the stairwell closer than she'd hoped. I know where you live, Clara. I know about your son. The sound of her real name on his lips sent ice through her veins, but also confirmed what she'd feared. They'd been watching her probably since the moment she'd pulled Adrian from that grave. She pushed herself harder, her phone clutched in her sweaty palm, containing the evidence that could destroy him if she could just survive long enough to use it. 23rd floor. 22nd. Her legs were beginning to shake from the exertion, but behind her she could hear Clemens gaining ground. Military training, she remembered Adrian saying. This man was conditioned for pursuit, for violence, for exactly this kind of chase. On the 18th floor, Clara made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing down, she burst through the door into the office corridor, hoping to lose him in the maze of cubicles and conference rooms. The floor was dark except for emergency lighting casting eerie shadows that could either hide her or reveal her position. She crouched behind a reception desk, trying to control her ragged breathing while listening for Clemens's approach. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, Adrian's number. She couldn't answer it without revealing her location, but the sight of his name on the screen reminded her of everything she was fighting for. The stairwell door opened with a soft click, and Clara heard Clemens' careful footsteps as he entered the office floor. He was moving slowly now, methodically, like a hunter who knew his prey was cornered. Clara, his voice carried across the darkened space, artificially calm. Let's be reasonable about this. You have something I need, and I have the power to make your problems disappear. Work with me and your son stays safe. Keep running and... He let the threat hang in the air. Clara closed her eyes, thinking of Tommy sleeping peacefully in their trailer, unaware that his mother was crouched in a corporate office playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. She thought of Adrian probably pacing their small living room in agony as her phone continued to ring unanswered. Most of all, she thought of Jonathan Blackwood, a little boy who deserved to have his father back. Opening her eyes, Clara looked around the reception area and spotted something that might help, a fire alarm mounted on the wall just a few feet away. If she could reach it without being seen, the chaos might give her the distraction she needed to escape. I know you're here. Clemens continued, his voice moving closer. And I know you're scared. But think about this logically. Adrian is already a dead man legally and soon to be literally. Nothing you do tonight will change that. But you and your son can still walk away from this. Clara waited until his voice seemed to come from the far side of the floor, then made her move. She lunged for the fire alarm and yanked the handle with all her strength. Immediately, piercing sirens filled the building. Emergency lights began flashing, and automated announcements started broadcasting evacuation instructions. The chaos was exactly what she'd hoped for. Clara ran for the nearest exit, using the confusion and noise to mask her movement. Behind her, she heard Clemens cursing, but the alarm system was working in her favor. Security personnel would be responding to the fire alert, and he couldn't pursue her openly without raising questions. She reached the main stairwell as security guards were beginning to flood upward, checking floors and coordinating the evacuation. Clara joined the stream of confused cleaning personnel and late-night workers being ushered toward the exits, just another employee following emergency protocols. "Move quickly, but don't run," a security guard called out. "Proceed to the nearest exit in an orderly fashion." Clara forced herself to walk normally, despite every instinct screaming at her to sprint. As they descended, she caught glimpses of Clemens several floors above, arguing with security personnel who were trying to evacuate him along with everyone else. His gun was hidden now, his corporate persona back in place, but she could see the fury in his rigid posture. The lobby was controlled chaos as emergency responders arrived and building personnel coordinated the evacuation. Clara moved with the crowd toward the main exit, her heart hammering as she waited for someone to grab her to expose her as the cause of the emergency. But she was invisible again, just another worker caught up in an unexpected building alarm. Outside fire trucks were arriving with sirens wailing, adding to the confusion. Clara walked quickly but steadily toward the parking area, resisting the urge to run until she was sure she was out of sight. Only when she reached her car did she allow herself to look back at the building, where Clemens was probably trying to explain to authorities why he'd been in his office during a fire alarm while armed with a gun. Her hands shook as she started the engine, adrenaline and terror making it difficult to focus. The evidence was safe on her phone, but Clemens knew who she was, where she lived. Everything had changed in the span of 30 minutes. Clara's phone rang again as she pulled out of the parking lot Adrian's number. This time she answered. "Clara, thank God." His voice was tight with worry. "I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. What happened?" "It went wrong," she said, her voice shaking as the reality of what had just occurred hit her. "Clemens was there. He knows I have the evidence, and Adrian, he knows you're alive." Silence on the other end of the line, then Adrian's voice deadly calm. "Are you hurt?" "No, but he threatened Tommy. He said he knows where we live." Clara had to pull over as tears of fear and rage blurred her vision. "He's going to come after us." "Listen to me carefully." Adrian's voice was steady, grounding her panic. "You're not going home. It's not safe. Drive to the Walmart on Route 15, the one that's open 24 hours. Park near the main entrance where there are cameras and witnesses. I'll meet you there." "What about Tommy?" "I'll get him. They don't know about the connection between us yet, and they won't expect me to risk exposure by going to the trailer." His voice was grim with determination. "But Clara, we're past the point of playing it safe. If they know you have evidence, if they're willing to kill to protect their secret, they'll come after all of us," Clara finished. "Yes, which means we accelerate our timeline. We use what you found tonight to force their hand before they can disappear." Clara wiped her eyes and pulled back onto the road, driving toward the designated meeting point while her mind raced. "I got everything, Adrian. Documents proving they planned it all, the arsenic poisoning, the car accident, even the burial site. It's all there in black and white." "You did it," he said, and she could hear the amazement in his voice. "You actually got the proof we need." "But at what cost? Now they know we're onto them, and they'll be desperate to tie up loose ends." "Desperate people make mistakes," Adrian said grimly. "And Clemens just made a big one by revealing himself to you in that office. He can't explain his presence there during a fire alarm without raising questions, especially if security footage shows him pursuing you." Clara reached the Walmart parking lot and found a spot under bright lights near the main entrance. The familiar sight of late-night shoppers and employees gave her a small measure of comfort. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the deadly drama playing out around them. "I'm here," she told Adrian. "How long until you get Tommy?" 20 minutes, maybe less. Stay where you are, stay visible, and call 911 if you see anyone suspicious approaching your car." After Adrian hung up, Clara sat in her car reviewing the photos she'd taken in Clemens' office. The evidence was damning detailed plans for murder laid out with corporate efficiency. Email exchanges between Clemens and Verena discussing Adrian's symptoms, timing schedules for the arsenic, dosing backup contingency plans if the car accident failed. One document in particular caught her attention, a custody agreement that had been prepared weeks before Adrian's supposed death, granting Verena full guardianship of Jonathan in the event of Adrian's incapacitation or death. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to me. Return it and disappear, or everyone you care about pays the price." Clara's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to screenshot the message. More evidence of Clemens's threats, more proof of the conspiracy. She forwarded the screenshot to Marcus Webb with a brief message. "The security consultant you met today. This is what we're dealing with." Minutes later, her phone rang. Marcus's voice was tense when she answered. "Ms. Mitchell, where are you?" "The building's emergency systems show someone triggered a fire alarm on the 18th floor, and Clemens Reeves is claiming there was an attempted break-in." "Because there was," Clara said. "I found evidence in his office proving he murdered Adrian Blackwood, and he threatened to kill me and my son to keep it quiet." "Jesus Christ." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are you safe?" "For now. But Marcus, there's something else you need to know." Clara took a breath, knowing she was about to reveal the truth that would change everything. Adrian Blackwood isn't dead. He survived the burial, and he's been hiding while we gathered evidence against the people who tried to kill him. The silence stretched so long, Clara thought the call had been dropped. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Adrian's alive." "Yes, and we have proof of everything, the poisoning, the staged accident, the attempted murder. But Clemens knows we have it, and he's going to try to silence us before we can expose him." "Where's Adrian now?" "Safe, but not for long. We need to move fast, Marcus, before they disappear or hurt someone else." "I'm calling the FBI," Marcus said decisively. "This is beyond corporate security now. We're talking about murder conspiracy fraud on a massive scale." "Do it. But be careful who you trust. Clemens said they have people everywhere." A car was pulling into the parking lot, and Clara tensed until she recognized Adrian's careful driving style. He parked next to her, and she could see Tommy's sleepy face in the passenger seat. "I have to go," she told Marcus. "But Marcus, thank you for believing me. Thank you for helping. Thank you for having the courage to expose the truth. I'll be in touch soon." Clara got out of her car as Adrian and Tommy approached. Tommy ran to her immediately, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Mom, are you okay?" Adrian said we had to leave really fast because bad people might come to our house. "I'm okay, baby." Clara hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent, and trying not to think about how close she'd come to never seeing him again. We're all going to be okay. Adrian's eyes searched her face in the harsh parking lot lights, taking in her disheveled appearance and the lingering fear in her expression. Tell me everything, he said quietly. As they sat in Clara's car with Tommy dozing between them, she recounted every detail of her encounter with Clemens, the evidence she'd found the chase through the building, the threats against their family. Adrian listened without interruption, his jaw growing tighter with each revelation. He made a mistake confronting you directly, Adrian said when she finished. It proves he's desperate, and desperate people make errors in judgment. But now he knows we have evidence. Won't he just destroy everything else and disappear? He can't. Too much of his life is tied up in Blackwood Technologies, in the identity he's built as my trusted business partner. Running would be an admission of guilt, and Clemens is too arrogant to believe we can actually bring him down. Adrian's voice was grim with certainty. He'll try to eliminate the threat instead. Us. Yes. Which is why we're going to end this tonight, before he has a chance to regroup. Clara stared at him. Tonight, how? By doing exactly what he won't expect. Instead of hiding, we're going public. We're going to expose everything at once so comprehensively that he won't be able to silence us or cover it up. The gala, Clara realized. You mentioned there was some kind of charity event this weekend. Tomorrow night. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala held in memory of my tragic death. Adrian's smile was sharp and without humor. 500 of the city's most influential people, including reporters, politicians, and business leaders, the perfect audience for my resurrection. But that's insane. You'll be walking into a room full of people completely exposed. Which is exactly why it will work. Clemens and Verena will be there as grieving business partner and widow, accepting condolences and consolidating their stolen power. They won't expect me to appear in such a public forum with so many witnesses. Clara felt a chill of apprehension. And if something goes wrong, if they try to kill you in front of all those people, then at least there will be witnesses this time. And more importantly, the evidence you gathered will already be in the hands of the FBI. Marcus said he was calling them. Good. But we need to make sure the evidence reaches more than just law enforcement. We need media coverage, public exposure, something so big that it can't be buried or dismissed. Adrian was quiet for a moment, thinking. I know someone who can help with that. Who? Sarah Chen, investigative reporter for the Washington Herald. She's been following corruption in the tech industry for years, and she's already suspicious about the circumstances of my death. If we can get her the evidence along with an exclusive interview, she'll blow the story wide open, Clara finished. Exactly. Between the FBI investigation and media coverage, Clemens and Verena won't be able to disappear or spin the narrative in their favor. Tommy stirred between them, mumbling in his sleep. Clara smoothed his hair gently, thinking about the enormous risk they were contemplating. What about Jonathan? If we expose this publicly, it means revealing that his father isn't really dead. That's going to be traumatic for a 10-year-old. Adrian's expression softened with pain and love. I know, but living with the lie would be worse for both of us. He deserves to know the truth, and I deserve the chance to be his father again. And Verena, she won't just give up custody without a fight. She'll be facing murder charges. Courts tend to frown on awarding custody to accused killers. Adrian's voice hardened. Besides, once the truth comes out, once Jonathan knows what she did to his father, you think he'll want to come home to you? I hope so. But even if he doesn't, even if he's angry at me for staying hidden while he grieved, at least he'll be safe from people who see him as nothing more than a tool to control my fortune. Clara studied Adrian's profile in the dim light, seeing the weight of fatherhood and responsibility that drove him even more than the desire for justice or revenge. She thought about her own fierce love for Tommy, the lengths she would go to protect him, and understood completely. "All right," she said finally. "What do you need me to do?" Adrian turned to look at her, surprise and gratitude warring in his expression. "Clara, you've already done more than enough. You've risked your life, exposed yourself to danger. And I'll keep doing it until this is finished," she interrupted firmly. "Until you get your son back and the people who hurt you face justice. We're in this together now, all the way." Something shifted in Adrian's eyes, surprise giving way to something deeper, more profound. "Together," he repeated as if testing the word. "I haven't had that in a very long time." "Well, you have it now." They spent the next hour parked under the bright lights of the Walmart parking lot, planning their strategy for the gala. Adrian called Sarah Chen from a burner phone he'd picked up, waking the reporter from sleep, but immediately capturing her attention with the promise of the story of a lifetime. "Adrian Blackwood." Sarah's voice was sharp with disbelief. "But you're dead. I covered your funeral." "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Adrian said dryly. "But the people who tried to kill me are very much alive and currently stealing my company and my son. Are you interested in the exclusive story of how I survived being buried alive?" "Holy shit. Yes. When and where?" "Tomorrow night at the Blackwood Foundation Gala." "But Sarah, this is dangerous. The people involved have already committed murder and won't hesitate to do it again." "Understood. What do you need from me?" "Media coverage, live stream if possible. I want this so public that it can't be covered up or spun." Adrian glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "And I need you to coordinate with the FBI. Make sure they're ready to make arrests the moment we go public." "Consider it done." "Adrian, are you really alive? This isn't some elaborate hoax." "I'm really alive, and tomorrow night the whole world is going to know it." As dawn began to break over the parking lot, Clara realized they'd been planning through the night. Tommy was still asleep in the back seat, and she felt a fierce surge of protectiveness watching his peaceful face. After tomorrow, their quiet life would be over forever. But maybe what they'd build in its place would be worth the risk. "We should find somewhere safe to spend the day," Adrian said, noting her exhaustion. "Somewhere Clemens won't think to look." "Where?" "I have a safe house about an hour from here. Nothing fancy, but it's secure and off the grid." Adrian's hand found hers in the dim light. "Clara, are you sure about this?" "Once we start tomorrow night, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Even though it means your quiet life is over, even though there will be media attention, investigations, probably months of legal proceedings." Clara thought about her small trailer, her simple routines, the safety of invisibility she'd cultivated since David left. Then she thought about the man beside her, who had crawled out of his own grave through sheer determination and love for his son. She thought about the connection between them, forged in crisis, but rooted in something deeper and more real than anything she'd ever experienced. "That quiet life was just surviving," she said softly. This is living." Adrian brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I love you," he said simply, as if the words had been waiting years to be spoken. Clara's breath caught. In all the chaos and danger and adrenaline-fueled planning, she hadn't expected this moment of perfect honesty. But looking into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability, alongside the strength, she knew her answer, without hesitation. "I love you too," she whispered. I think I have since the moment I found you in that grave. Even though I've brought nothing but danger into your life, you've brought hope into my life. Purpose. The chance to be part of something bigger than just getting by from day to day. Clara smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. You've brought love. As they drove toward Adrian's safe house with Tommy sleeping peacefully in the back seat, Clara thought about how dramatically her world had changed in less than a week. 7 days ago, she'd been a struggling single mother with no prospects beyond survival. Now she was planning to help expose a murder conspiracy, reunite a father with his son, and possibly build a future with a man who'd literally risen from the dead for love. It was impossible. It was dangerous. It was completely insane. It was also the most alive she'd ever felt in her life. The safe house was a modest cabin tucked into a wooded area outside the city, surrounded by trees and invisible from the road. Adrian had purchased it years ago under a false identity, a precaution that had seemed paranoid at the time, but now proved invaluable. As they settled Tommy on the couch and tried to get a few hours of sleep before the evening's confrontation, Clara allowed herself to imagine what might come after. If they succeeded, if Adrian got his son back and justice was served, what would their life together look like? What are you thinking about? Adrian asked softly, lying beside her on the small bed. The future, Clara admitted. Assuming we survive tonight. We will, Adrian said with quiet certainty. We have too much to live for, not to. What happens after? When the legal battles are over and the media attention dies down. Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. I suppose that depends on what you want. What we want together. I want a life where Tommy and Jonathan can be brothers, where we can have family dinners and homework help, and all the ordinary wonderful things that make a home. Clara turned to face him in the dim light. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that we chose each other not because of crisis or drama, but because we love each other. That sounds perfect, Adrian whispered, pulling her closer. Absolutely perfect. As afternoon faded into evening, they prepared for what would either be their triumph or their destruction. Adrian put on the one good suit he'd managed to salvage, while Clara wore a dress she'd bought years ago for a job interview, simple, elegant, appropriate for a woman about to help bring down a murder conspiracy at a charity gala. You look beautiful, Adrian said, adjusting his tie in the small mirror. You look alive, Clara replied, and they both smiled at the profound truth of that simple statement. Tommy was staying at the safe house with detailed instructions to call 911 if they weren't back by midnight. The plan was risky, but leaving him alone was safer than bringing him into potential danger at the gala. Take care of your mom, Adrian told Tommy seriously as they prepared to leave. And if we don't come back, you will, Tommy interrupted with 8-year-old certainty. Because good guys always win. From your lips to God's ears, Clara murmured, hugging her son tightly. As they drove toward the city and the confrontation that would determine all their futures, Clara thought about that first night when she'd pulled Adrian from his makeshift grave. She'd had no idea then that saving one man's life would lead to this moment, dressed for a gala planning to expose murderers, in love with someone she'd known for less than a week. But sometimes the most important decisions were made in an instant, based on nothing more than the certainty that it was the right thing to do. Just as she'd known kneeling in that cold dirt that she couldn't leave Adrian to die, she knew now that whatever happened tonight, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Together, facing the darkness, ready to step into the light. The Blackwood Foundation Gala was being held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, its ballroom glittering with crystal chandeliers and filled with the city's elite. As their car approached the valet stand, Clara could see reporters and photographers covering the event, just as Adrian had hoped. "Ready?" Adrian asked, his hand finding hers. "Ready," Clara confirmed, though her heart was racing with anticipation and terror. As they stepped out of the car and walked toward the hotel entrance, Clara knew there was no turning back. In a few minutes, Adrian Blackwood would rise from the dead in front of 500 witnesses, and their quiet life would be over forever. But as his hand tightened around hers, and she saw the determination in his eyes, Clara realized she wouldn't change a thing. This was their moment, their chance to reclaim everything that had been stolen and build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The lobby doors opened before them, and together they stepped into their future. The Grand Meridian's ballroom was a symphony of crystal and gold, filled with the soft murmur of 500 conversations and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Clara had never seen such opulence, towering floral arrangements, tables draped in silk, and enough diamonds to fund a small country's budget. She felt utterly out of place in her simple black dress, but Adrian's hand in hers anchored her courage. "Breathe," he whispered as they paused at the entrance, surveying the scene. "You belong here as much as anyone." Near the center of the room, Clara spotted them immediately. Verena Blackwood stood beside an enormous portrait of Adrian, her black designer gown perfectly complementing her role as the grieving widow. She was beautiful in an ice-cold way, with platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon and diamonds at her throat that probably cost more than Clara's trailer. Beside her, Clemens Reeves played the part of the loyal friend, his arm protectively around Verena's shoulders as donors approached to offer condolences. "Look at them," Clara breathed, disgust evident in her voice. "Playing their parts so perfectly." "They've had months to practice," Adrian replied grimly. "But tonight, the curtain comes down." Sarah Chen approached them from across the room, her press credentials visible and her cameraman trailing behind. She looked exactly as Clara had imagined, sharp, intelligent, with the kind of intensity that marked the best investigative journalists. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered as she reached them, her eyes wide with amazement. "You really are alive. This is the story of the decade." "It will be if we survive the next hour," Adrian said quietly. "Are your people in position?" FBI agents are stationed throughout the building, and we're streaming live to the Herald's website. The moment you go public, this becomes national news. Sarah's expression grew serious. "But Adrian, they've had security added tonight. More than usual for a charity event." "Clemens is expecting trouble." Adrian nodded. "Good. Nervous people make mistakes." Clara watched Verena across the room, noting how she touched her necklace nervously while scanning the crowd. Something was making her uncomfortable, and Clara wondered if somehow she sensed the danger approaching. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Jonathan is here tonight." Clara felt Adrian go rigid beside her. "What?" "Verena brought him. He's sitting at the head table wearing a small black suit. She's been introducing him to donors as Adrian's brave little boy, who's coping so well with his loss." Adrian's jaw clenched, and Clara could see the rage building in his eyes. "She's using him as a prop, making him perform grief for an audience while she steals everything I built." "Where is he now?" Clara asked, already scanning the room. "Near the stage at table 1. But Adrian, you need to be careful. If you approach him before the reveal, if he reacts..." Sarah trailed off, but the implication was clear. A 10-year-old's emotional response could derail their entire plan. "I know." Adrian's voice was thick with emotion. "I know I can't go to him yet. But God, Clara, seeing him sitting there thinking his father is dead. Clara squeezed his hand tightly. In a few minutes he'll know the truth. He'll know you never abandoned him. The evening's program began with a video tribute to Adrian's life and philanthropic work. Clara watched fascinated and heartbroken as images of him with Jonathan filled the massive screens around the ballroom. Father and son at baseball games, science museums, birthday parties, a lifetime of love that had been stolen by greed and betrayal. As the video ended, Verena took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked every inch the devoted widow, her voice trembling with perfectly performed emotion as she spoke about Adrian's legacy and their shared commitment to continuing his charitable work. My husband was taken from us far too soon, Verena said, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. But his vision, his generosity, his love for those in need, these things live on through the foundation that bears his name. Clara felt sick watching the performance. She's actually good at this. Sociopaths usually are, Adrian replied coldly. They've had years to perfect the art of emotional manipulation. Clemens joined Verena on stage, taking the microphone with practiced ease. Adrian Blackwood was more than my business partner. He was my brother in every way that mattered. His sudden death has left a void that can never be filled, but Verena and I are committed to ensuring his work continues. Together we will honor Adrian's memory by expanding the foundation's reach, by touching more lives, by making the kind of difference he always dreamed of. Clemens's arm went around Verena's waist in a gesture that would have seemed supportive to anyone who didn't know they were lovers and co-conspirators. That's our cue, Adrian said quietly. Sarah, are you ready? Rolling live in 3, 2. Sarah nodded to her cameraman, who began filming as she spoke into her microphone. This is Sarah Chen, reporting live from the Blackwood Foundation Gala, where we're about to witness what may be the most extraordinary revelation in recent memory. Adrian straightened his shoulders, his hand releasing Clara's as he prepared to step into the light. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Clara said firmly. You have the truth. Adrian began walking toward the stage, moving through the crowd with purposeful strides. At first, only a few people noticed him, guests, turning to look at the well-dressed man, making his way toward the front of the room. But as recognition dawned, gasps began to ripple through the audience. Oh my God, someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. Is that? It can't be. But he looks exactly like... The murmur grew to a roar as more people recognized the supposedly dead billionaire walking among them. Phones came out, cameras flashed, and the carefully orchestrated evening began to dissolve into chaos. On stage, Verena and Clemens had gone rigid with shock. Verena's face had drained of all color, her perfect composure cracking like ice in spring. Clemens looked like a man watching his own execution approach. Adrian reached the base of the stage and climbed the steps with deliberate calm. The ballroom had fallen into stunned silence, except for the clicking of cameras and the low hum of Sarah Chen's live commentary. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system as he took the microphone from Clemens's nerveless fingers. I apologize for interrupting this lovely tribute to my death, but as you can see, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. The silence broke like a dam, with shouts and exclamations erupting from every corner of the ballroom. But Adrian continued speaking, his voice cutting through the chaos with commanding authority. 3 weeks ago, my wife and business partner tried to murder me. They poisoned me with arsenic for months, and when that didn't work fast enough, they staged a car accident and buried me alive in the woods. Adrian's eyes found Jonathan at the head table, and Clara saw the exact moment his son recognized him, the little boy's face transforming from confusion to disbelief to overwhelming joy. Daddy! Jonathan's voice carried across the ballroom, high and clear and heartbroken. He scrambled from his chair and began running toward the stage, tears streaming down his face. Adrian jumped down from the platform and caught his son in his arms, both of them sobbing as 10-year-old hands clutched at his father's jacket, as if afraid he might disappear again. "I'm here, buddy," Adrian whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm here and I'm never leaving you again." "But you were dead," Jonathan sobbed. "They said you were dead, and I couldn't even visit your grave because there wasn't anything left." I know. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I'm alive, Jonathan. I'm alive and I love you so much." The reunion between father and son had the entire ballroom in tears, but Clara kept her eyes on Verena and Clemens. Verena looked like she was about to faint, swaying on her feet, as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. Clemens, however, was reaching inside his jacket, and Clara realized with horror that he was going for a weapon. "Adrian!" she screamed, but her warning was lost in the chaos of 500 people talking, crying, and trying to process what they were witnessing. Clemens pulled out a gun, raising it toward Adrian and Jonathan. But before he could fire, Marcus Webb appeared behind him, moving with military precision to disarm and restrain him. "FBI!" voices shouted from multiple points around the ballroom as federal agents emerged from their positions among the guests. "Nobody move!" The chaos was complete now, guests screaming and diving for cover, agents shouting orders, reporters pushing forward to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. In the center of it all, Adrian held his son protectively, shielding him from the violence and confusion. "Verena Blackwood and Clemens Reeves, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and kidnapping," an FBI agent announced as handcuffs were applied. "You have the right to remain silent." Verena finally found her voice, her composure completely shattered. "This is impossible," she shrieked, struggling against the agents restraining her. "He's dead. I watched them bury him." "Not well enough, apparently," Clara said, appearing at Adrian's side as the immediate danger passed. She looked down at Jonathan, who was staring at her with curious red-rimmed eyes. "Who are you?" he asked with the directness of childhood. "I'm Clara," she said gently. "I'm the one who found your daddy and helped him get back to you." Jonathan considered this seriously, then released one arm from around Adrian to hug Clara as well. "Thank you for bringing him home." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes as she returned the boy's embrace. "You're very welcome, sweetheart." As the FBI led Verena and Clemens away in handcuffs, Sarah Chen approached with her cameraman still rolling. "Adrian, can you tell us how you survived being buried alive?" "An angel found me," Adrian said simply, his arm around Clara's waist. "A woman with enough courage and compassion to save a stranger's life, and enough strength to help me reclaim everything that had been stolen." "Clara Hartwell," Clara supplied, smiling at the reporter. "Single mother and former diner waitress. Definitely not an angel." "I disagree," Adrian said softly, looking at her with such love that Clara felt her knees go weak. The next several hours passed in a blur of interviews, statements to federal agents, and medical examinations. Jonathan refused to leave his father's side, clinging to Adrian's hand, as if afraid he might disappear again. Clara stayed close as well, helping to navigate the chaos, while Tommy was brought from the safe house to join them. The two boys hit it off immediately, with Jonathan fascinated by Tommy's matter-of-fact acceptance of the extraordinary situation, and Tommy delighted to have an almost brother who shared his love of adventure stories. "So you really dug him out of a grave?" Jonathan asked Tommy, as they sat in the hotel's security office waiting for the interviews to conclude. "Mom did most of the digging," Tommy replied. "But I helped. He was really dirty and hurt, but he was nice even though he was almost dead. That's so cool, Jonathan said with the bloodthirsty enthusiasm of a 10-year-old. Did he look like a zombie? Boys, Clara interrupted gently, though she was smiling. Let's maybe focus on the fact that everything turned out okay. As dawn broke over the city, they finally left the hotel together, Adrian, Clara, Jonathan, and Tommy, a newly formed family, born from crisis but bound by love. The media was calling it the story of the century, but for Clara, it was simply the beginning of the life she'd always dreamed of. 6 months later, Clara stood in the kitchen of their new home, a beautiful house with enough space for 2 boys, a recovered billionaire, and one former diner waitress, who was still getting used to having more than one outfit in her closet. Through the window, she could see Adrian and the boys building a treehouse in the backyard, their laughter carrying on the warm spring air. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Verena and Clemens were both serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. The arsenic poisoning had caused some permanent damage to Adrian's nervous system, but he was alive and healthy and more grateful for each day than she'd ever seen anyone be. Blackwood Technologies had been restructured with Marcus Webb as CEO, while Adrian focused on his foundation work and being a full-time father. Clara had discovered a talent for nonprofit management and now ran the foundation's day-to-day operations, finding deep satisfaction in work that actually mattered. "Mom," Tommy called from the yard, "Jonathan says his dad wants to ask you something important." Clara smiled, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she headed outside. She found Adrian standing beneath the half-built treehouse, looking nervous, in a way she hadn't seen since the night they'd exposed his would-be killers. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," Adrian said quickly. "Everything's perfect, actually, which is what I wanted to talk to you about." He dropped to one knee on the grass, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Clara's breath caught as she realized what was happening. "Clara Hartwell," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me back my son, my future, and most importantly, you gave me love I never thought I deserved." Tears were streaming down Clara's face as she looked at this man who had changed her entire world. Around them, the boys had gone silent, watching with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. "Will you marry me?" Adrian asked. "Will you be my wife and Jonathan's stepmother, and let us be the family we were always meant to be?" "Yes," Clara whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course yes." As Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promise and forever. Tommy and Jonathan erupted into cheers. Neighbors peered over fences to see what the celebration was about, and Clara realized she didn't care who was watching. She had found her home, her family, her happily ever after in the most impossible circumstances. Love had quite literally risen from the grave, and now it would live on in the laughter of children, the warmth of shared meals, and the quiet moments between a man and woman who had chosen each other against all odds. That evening, as they tucked the boys into their beds in rooms down the hall from each other, Clara marveled at how natural it all felt. Jonathan had settled into their family as if he'd always belonged there, while Tommy had embraced his role as protective big brother with enthusiasm. "Are you happy?" Adrian asked, as they stood in the doorway of Jonathan's room, watching their son sleep peacefully for the first time in months. "I'm beyond happy," Clara replied honestly. "I'm grateful. I'm amazed. I'm so in love with our life that sometimes I can't believe it's real." "It's real," Adrian said, pulling her close. "We're real. This family is real, and it's ours for the rest of our lives." As they walked to their own bedroom, Clara thought about that first night when she'd knelt in the cold dirt and heard a voice calling for help. She'd had no idea that saving one man would lead to saving herself, to finding a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible. The woman who had been buried under years of disappointment and struggle had emerged as surely as Adrian had risen from his grave. They had both been reborn that night in the woods, and now they were building something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. "I love you," Clara whispered as they settled into bed, her engagement ring catching the moonlight from their window. "I love you too," Adrian replied, his arms gathering her close. "Thank you for digging me out of that grave, Clara. Thank you for bringing me back to life. Thank you for letting me save you," she whispered back, "and for saving me right back." Outside their window, the stars shone down on a house full of love, laughter, and second chances. In the morning, there would be wedding plans to make, foundation work to do, and 2 boys to raise into good men. But tonight, there was just this: the quiet contentment of 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Clara fell asleep in the arms of the man she'd pulled from death itself, knowing that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Love, it turned out, really could conquer anything, even the grave. 3 years later, on a warm autumn day, remarkably similar to the one when their story began, Clara stood in the same woods where she'd first heard Adrian's voice calling for help. But this time she wasn't alone and afraid. This time she was surrounded by family. "Tell us the story again, Mom," 5-year-old Emma demanded, her small hand clutching Clara's as they walked along the path. Emma was their miracle baby, born 2 years after the wedding, with Adrian's green eyes and Clara's stubborn determination. "Which story, sweetheart?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "The story about how you found Daddy." Emma bounced with excitement. "And how he was buried like treasure." Tommy, now 11, and trying to project teenage sophistication, rolled his eyes. "It's not treasure, Em. He was almost dead. But Mom found him and saved him, just like in fairy tales," Jonathan added, still young enough at 13 to believe in magic and happily ever after. "It wasn't quite like a fairy tale," Adrian said gently, lifting Emma onto his shoulders. "It was better than a fairy tale because it was real." They walked to the spot where Adrian's makeshift grave had been now marked by a small memorial garden they'd planted together. Not a monument to death, but a celebration of second chances and the power of love to overcome any darkness. "You know what I think," Emma said from her perch on Adrian's shoulders. "What's that, princess? I think you and Mommy were meant to find each other. Like the trees know where to grow and the birds know where to fly. You just knew." Clara exchanged a smile with Adrian over their daughter's head. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. "You might be right about that," Adrian said softly, his free hand finding Clara's. "Sometimes the most important things in life find us when we need them most." As they walked back toward their car, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The foundation was thriving, having helped thousands of families rebuild their lives after betrayal and loss. Tommy was an honor student with plans to become a doctor. Jonathan was following in his father's footsteps with a love of technology and innovation, and Emma was growing up surrounded by so much love that she radiated joy like sunshine. "No regrets?" Adrian asked quietly as they reached the car, using the same words he'd spoken that first night in her trailer. Clara looked at her family, her husband helping their daughter into her car seat, their boys arguing good-naturedly about some video game, the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate tragedies, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. "None," she said firmly, just as she had 3 years ago. "No regrets at all." As they drove home through the golden autumn light, Clara thought about all the graves in the world, graves of dreams, of hope, of love that seemed lost forever. But sometimes, if you were brave enough to dig, if you were willing to get your hands dirty and your heart broken, you might just find that what you thought was buried was actually waiting to be reborn. Sometimes love really did rise from the grave. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it took you with it into a life more beautiful than anything you'd ever dared to dream. The Hartwell Blackwood family drove toward home toward dinner, around a table full of laughter, toward bedtime stories and homework, help, and all the ordinary miracles that make a family. Behind them, the woods kept their secrets, but the most important one had already been revealed. Love endures, love transforms, and sometimes love literally saves lives.